We think it's best if you don't come. That was the whole message. No hi Marcia, no hope you're doing okay. Just 10 words, sent by my cousin Emily, on behalf of the family. I read it 3 times before locking my phone. The kettle had just finished boiling. The soft whistle still hung in the air like a question no one wanted to answer. Outside, it was raining. Not the dramatic kind, just that gray, steady drizzle that blurs the edges of everything. I poured hot water over a tea bag and stood still for a moment. They didn't want me at the funeral. That much was clear. They had talked, the family, as they liked to say. The ones who coordinated flowers and seating charts and photo boards. The ones who cried the loudest in public and said the least when it really mattered. And they had decided that I, the granddaughter who once spent entire summers reading beside Grandpa's chair, the one who sat with him through his final chemo sessions, shouldn't come. Because I was too distant. Because I hadn't been around. Because I'd moved out west. Because some people might feel awkward. I didn't cry. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because the pain had already dried into something sharper. Something you don't cry over anymore. Something that sits behind your eyes and changes the way you breathe. My name is Marcia Collins. I'm 34 years old. I live in a small rented house in Oregon, far from the polished halls of the Collins family estate in Connecticut. I write books, quiet ones, stories about grief, about being the one left out, about how silence in a family can echo louder than any slam of a door. My family doesn't read my books. They know I do something with publishing, but if you asked my aunt to name one title, she'd blink and say, "Oh, Marcia writes about feelings, I think." They say it like a shrug. Like a diagnosis they don't believe in. But Grandpa knew. He was the only one who ever really asked. The only one who remembered my release dates. The only one who mailed me handwritten notes, even when his hands began to shake. "You have a gift, kiddo," he once told me. "You make people feel things without raising your voice. That's rare." The last time I saw him, we sat on a park bench behind his assisted living center. He was thinner than I'd ever seen him. But his eyes, still sharp, still stubborn. "If I go before your next visit," he said, half smiling, "promise me something." "What?" "Tell the truth." "About what?" "Whatever they try to hide." I didn't understand what he meant then, but I said yes, and now, sitting in my small kitchen with cold tea and rain hitting the window, I realized what he meant. I hadn't spoken to Emily in 6 months. We were never close. She was the kind who always knew the guest list before the invitations went out. The kind who wore pearls to brunch and never showed up without an agenda. And now she was speaking for the family. Now she was telling me to stay away from the one place I thought I still belonged. At 9:12 a.m. the next morning, I received a call from a New York number I didn't recognize. "Miss Collins?" "Yes?" "My name is Peter Grady. I'm the director of the memorial service for Mr. Harold Collins. I was given your number by," he paused, "by Mr. Collins himself, a few weeks ago." I didn't speak, just waited. He left very specific instructions, including that you'd be the one to read the closing statement at the end of the service. I blinked. "Excuse me?" "It's written in the funeral program he drafted with us. Handwritten, signed. You are listed as the sole speaker for the final reflection." Silence stretched between us. Then I asked, "Does the family know?" "Not yet," he said carefully, "but we're obligated to follow his wishes." I hung up, stared at the wall, and finally smiled. Not a smile of victory, not of revenge, just one of recognition of being seen. I didn't reply to the message from Emily. I didn't ask why. Not because I wasn't hurt, but because after a while, you stop expecting answers from people who only call when they've made up their minds. I kept rereading Peter Grady's words instead. The funeral director. The voice that cut through the fog of being unwanted. "Your grandfather listed you as the final speaker." The final speaker. Not a family eulogy. Not some vague group tribute. He'd written it down, signed it, as if to say, "They won't give you a seat, so I'll give you the floor." I sat in silence for a long time after that call. The room didn't feel different, but I did. It was like I'd been standing on the edges of a photograph my whole life, slightly out of frame. And suddenly, someone reached over and pulled me into focus. I opened my laptop, typed one-way ticket to Hartford. Booked the last seat on the red-eye. I didn't tell anyone, not even my mother. Especially not my mother. The next morning, I pulled out the black suitcase I hadn't used in 2 years. Inside, there was still a folded train ticket from Chicago and a wrapped bar of soap from a hotel I'd stayed in for a book signing no one in my family knew happened. I packed slowly. Not like I was going to a funeral. More like I was preparing for a conversation I'd been denied my whole life. I paused at my bookshelf, ran my fingers across the spines. Most were mine. Stories I'd written over the last decade. Some about loss, some about mothers, none of them read by the woman who gave birth to me. But one book, my second, was different. Grandpa had read that one. I found the copy he mailed back to me, dog-eared and underlined. A note inside the cover, page 143. This one made me tear up. Didn't think I could anymore. That page read, "Real grief isn't loud. It's the empty chair, the untouched mug, the silence that doesn't ask where you went." I slipped the book into my bag. That afternoon, I made tea and sat by the window. The same view I'd looked at for 6 years. A crooked birch tree, a quiet street, a neighbor who watered her plants like she was apologizing to them. But I didn't see any of it. My mind was back in Grandpa's garden. Back when I was 10, and he taught me how to prune roses. "You don't just cut the dead parts," he'd said. "You cut where you want new growth to happen." At the time, I thought it was about plants. Now I knew it was about people. The next message from Emily came just after 5 p.m. "Hey, just spoke to Peter. Heard you're reading at the end? That's unexpected. Are you sure that's a good idea?" No apology, no acknowledgement that she'd asked me not to come. Just a warning disguised as concern. I didn't respond, but I opened a fresh page in my notebook. Wrote at the top, closing words for Grandpa. Then I let the pen hover. What does a person say at the end of a life? What words do you offer when the person who believed in you is gone, and the ones who stayed never wanted to hear you in the first place? That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the last visit. Hospice room. Faint beeping. A window cracked open, even though it was cold. He liked fresh air. Always had. He could barely sit up, but when he saw me, he smiled like I was spring breaking through snow. "You came," he whispered. "Of course I did." We talked for over an hour. About the garden. About a poem I wrote in college. About a family recipe for gingerbread he swore he remembered better than Grandma ever did. Before I left, he took my hand. "They won't understand you, Marsh," he said. "They never tried, but don't let them make you forget who you are." I squeezed his hand back. Didn't cry until the Uber pulled away. Now, I opened that same notebook, wrote the first line of the speech. It wasn't grand, wasn't clever, just truth. "You were the only one who saw me as whole." Around midnight, I got up and walked to the kitchen. He used to call me at night sometimes. Not long calls, just 5 minutes. Enough to say, "Saw something on the news about Oregon. You good? That poem you wrote in the magazine, real nice. Don't let the world rush you. You write at your own pace." I missed those calls more than I'd ever said out loud. I opened the fridge, closed it again. What I needed wasn't there. What I needed was 5 minutes with someone who remembered who I was, without needing an explanation. At 2 a.m., I printed out the speech draft. Folded it carefully, slid it into a leather folio Grandpa had given me when I got my first publishing deal. "So you can look like you belong in those meetings," he'd joked. "I already do," I'd said. "Damn right you do." As I zipped my suitcase, I whispered to the room, "I'm not going for them." I paused. "I'm going for you." The chapel smelled exactly the way I remembered. Old wood, furniture polish, and something else, something floral and faded, like lilies left too long in a vase. I hadn't walked through these doors since I was 16. The last time, it had been for Grandma's funeral. I wore a navy dress with a stiff collar and shoes that pinched. No one had saved me a seat. I stood in the back, behind the piano. No one noticed. They'd said later, "Oh, were you there? You must have slipped out early." I hadn't. I'd stayed the whole time, just unseen. Peter Grady's footsteps echoed softly as he led me down the corridor. The building was already buzzing with the low hum of hushed voices, polite sobs, rustling programs. That particular kind of grief people perform when they're still too self-aware to fall apart. He opened a door off the side aisle. "You can wait here until we call you." I nodded. The room was small. 2 armchairs, a side table with a pitcher of water, a mirror above a fireplace, slightly cracked in one corner. I caught my reflection. Black dress, low bun, eyes that hadn't slept. I didn't look like the girl they used to roll their eyes at during Thanksgiving dinner. Didn't look like the niece who wore boots instead of ballet flats. Didn't look like the disappointment they'd handed over to time. I looked like someone they didn't recognize. And maybe that was the point. I sat down and pulled out the speech, not to read, just to feel it in my hands. The paper was thick, almost too stiff. Grandpa would have smiled at that. He hated flimsy things, said they had no spine. Like people who apologize for being smart, he once said, or women who say sorry for interrupting when they were never the ones interrupting in the first place. At 7:47, I heard the first murmurs from the sanctuary. Doors opening, shoes on carpet, chairs scraping the floor. A cough, sharp and clipped, Aunt Miriam, maybe. She always coughed like she was angry at her own lungs. I stood and walked to the doorway. Didn't step out. Just watched. Emily arrived first. Of course, her coat was camel wool. Her dress had buttons down the back. Her heels didn't click. They whispered, like they knew they belonged. She moved with the certainty of someone who never doubted her place in a room. She had the same look she always had. Like everything she saw was a reflection of her own good decisions. She hugged people she didn't like. Took her time placing her purse, and looked back only once, toward the front, never the sides. She didn't see me. She never did. Then came the rest of them. Aunts, uncles, cousins with names I forgot, but faces I remembered from Christmases filled with laughter that stopped when I walked in. My mother entered near the middle of the crowd. Alone. I noticed her hands first, still thin, still clenched. Her lipstick was darker than usual, and her eyes scanned the pews not with grief, but with inventory. Where were the flowers? Why weren't the programs centered? Had they lit the correct candles? Not once did she look behind her. It hit me then. How many rooms I had entered like this. How many birthdays I'd attended and gone unnoticed. How many family dinners where my chair felt colder than the others. How often I was introduced not as Marcia, but as the one who moved out west, the one who wrote those little books. They always said it like a defense, as if my distance was something they had to explain, not something they created. At 8:05, the organ began to play, low, slow, intentional. I could feel it vibrating in the floorboards, the kind of music meant to carry you from one world to the next, or at least make you believe you were moving somewhere sacred. I stepped back from the doorway. Sat down again. I didn't want to cry. Not because I was trying to be strong, but because I didn't want them to think I needed to. Grandpa used to say funerals weren't for the dead. They're for the people who ignored you, he'd smirk, so they can feel like they said something before it was too late. But I knew. He had already said everything. To me. There was a knock on the door. Peter again. They're finishing the second hymn. You'll be next. I nodded, smoothed the paper in my hand, and stood. My knees didn't shake, but something deeper did. Not fear. Not anger. Just the memory of being invisible. And now, I was about to be seen. I walked the long side aisle. Every row felt like a courtroom. Eyes followed. Whispers caught in throats. One woman I didn't recognize clutched her pearls like they'd keep her safe. Emily's face paled. My mother blinked once, twice, but said nothing. No one stopped me, because no one could. I reached the pulpit, placed the page on the stand, took a breath, looked up, and began. The paper in my hand didn't shake, not because I wasn't nervous, but because the shaking had already happened. Years ago, behind locked doors, in bathrooms at family dinners, in cars outside houses that weren't mine to walk into without permission. By now I was settled, not calm, not detached, just steady, like grief that had nowhere left to go except forward. I looked up. They were all watching. Of course they were. You don't spend years ignoring someone and then look away the moment she speaks. My name is Marcia Collins. I paused. I didn't raise my voice, didn't clear my throat to claim attention. I wasn't performing. I was remembering. I'm Harold's granddaughter. Some of you probably haven't seen me in years. Others might not have noticed I was gone. Someone in the third pew flinched. I let the silence sit. Not to be dramatic, just to let the honesty land. But he noticed. Grandpa always noticed. A breath somewhere behind me. Not a sigh, more like someone holding back a noise they didn't have words for. He was the only one who called on my birthdays, even when no one else remembered the date. He didn't ask why I left Connecticut. He just asked if I felt like myself out there. He didn't ask what I wrote about. He just said, keep writing it. I looked at the front row. My mother was still, almost sculpted, her lips tight, fingers knotted in her lap. Emily blinked twice, but didn't look away. Aunt Diane had gone pale. I lowered my eyes to the paper, ran my fingers along the edge, a habit I hadn't noticed I still had, the same one I used when Grandpa made me practice piano and I wanted to stall before a difficult piece. He never rushed me, just sat beside me and waited. This week I was told, kindly, quietly, that maybe I shouldn't come. A slow, visible ripple moved through the room. No one spoke. I didn't look at Emily, but I felt her shift. I understand why. I haven't been part of the group pictures. I haven't brought sweet potato casserole to Thanksgiving. I haven't given them reasons to explain me. But Grandpa didn't need reasons. He invited me anyway. The silence cracked, just a little. Someone sniffled. Someone else muttered something under their breath. I pressed on. We used to sit in his garden in the fall. I'd be writing in my notebook. He'd be reading old National Geographic issues, and out of nowhere he'd say things like, "People don't get kinder when they get older. They just get better at hiding what they really think." And then he'd smile at me, that crooked smile, like he knew I'd end up quoting him someday. He taught me how to prune roses, how to seal windows before winter, how to hold my own in a conversation full of men who didn't believe I belonged. I turned the page. But mostly, he taught me this, that love doesn't look like obligation, it looks like a voice that says, I see you, even if no one else does. The paper was thin, it made a soft sound when I turned it, almost like breath, and that breath filled the room. No one moved, no one coughed. I looked up again. This time, I saw it. Guilt, regret, recognition, not from everyone, but enough. Today I'm not speaking to defend myself, or to explain where I've been. I'm here because a man who spent his life loving quietly asked me to speak loudly just this once. So this is for you, Grandpa. For every time you waited for me to finish my sentence when someone else talked over me. For every poem you sent back with the word wow scribbled in the margins. For every voicemail that ended with call when you're ready, no rush. I paused, folded the final page, held it in my hands. I hope wherever you are, there's a garden full of tomatoes you planted too early and music you said was too sad, but played anyway. I hope you saved me a seat. I stepped back. No applause. No nods. But for the first time in my life, no one interrupted. I walked down the steps of the chapel slowly. The air outside felt different. Not colder, not warmer, just real. The kind of air you only feel after saying something that's been sitting on your chest for years. Something heavy, but yours. People were filtering out behind me. Some paused near the memorial flowers, some hovered around the photo boards, some lit another candle out of ritual, not memory. No one came up to me, and I didn't expect them to. I stood near the edge of the walkway, under an old oak tree. Same one I used to sit under as a child when everyone else was inside gossiping over pecan pie. Back then, I thought trees could hear better than people. They never interrupted. They never talked over the quiet. Peter Grady passed me on his way to the parking lot. He gave me a small nod. No words. Just something in his eyes that said, I heard it. Sometimes that's all you need. I pulled my coat tighter. The wind was soft, brushing along my hair like it wasn't sure it should be touching me. I was about to walk toward the sidewalk when I heard it. A small voice, not loud, not sure. Just, excuse me? I turned. A boy stood behind me, maybe 9, maybe 10, tie a little crooked, shoes too big, holding a folded program in one hand like it was a homework sheet he'd lost the instructions for. He looked up at me, eyes too big for his face. Are you really the one who writes those books? I froze. Not out of shock, but because it had been so long since someone asked me with wonder, not confusion, not judgment, just pure, unfiltered curiosity. I smiled. I am. He looked down at his shoes, then back up. I liked what you said, about the tomatoes. Yeah? My granddad planted things too early sometimes. I thought that meant he didn't know, but maybe he just didn't want to wait. I blinked hard. That wasn't what I expected to hear. What's your name? I asked. Leo. He said, then hesitated. Leo Monroe. I think we're cousins? Maybe second cousins? I nodded. Nice to meet you, Leo Monroe. He shuffled a bit, then held out the program. Can you sign it? I looked at him. He wasn't asking for approval, wasn't trying to prove he knew someone important. He just wanted to remember this moment, and me. I took the program. Do you have a pen? He reached into his coat, pulled out a tiny blue pen with a bent clip. It doesn't work great. That's okay, I said. Neither do I some days. He giggled. The kind of giggle kids only give when they feel safe. I signed it. For Leo, may you always plant things early if your heart can handle the weight. Marcia Collins. He read it silently, then hugged it to his chest like it might fly away. I'm gonna read your books. Start with the second one, I said. The first is a little sad. I like sad, he said. Then you'll love it. His mother called him from a few feet away. He looked back at her, then at me. They said you weren't supposed to be here, but I'm glad you came. I crouched a bit to his level. Me too, Leo. And I meant it. He ran off, shoes still too big, joy unbothered. And I stood there alone but lighter. Because sometimes you don't need the whole room to hear you. Just one person who wasn't told not to listen. Later that night, I walked past the old house, Grandpa's. The porch light was still on. I stood on the sidewalk. Didn't go in. Didn't need to. The house didn't hold him anymore. But I liked to think it remembered. I pictured him sitting in the old recliner, glasses slipping, newspaper folded across his lap, one leg crossed over the other, looking up, seeing me at the door. Took you long enough, kid, I smiled. I had to take the long way back. I didn't stay long, just enough. Just like his phone calls, just like his letters, just enough. When I got back to the hotel, I changed into pajamas, made a cup of chamomile, and opened my laptop. A new document. No title yet, just a line. The last word was never about being heard. It was about being trusted to speak. A week passed, no calls, no messages, no apologies, but no accusations either. The silence didn't feel like punishment this time. It felt earned. Back in Oregon, the mornings were colder. My porch overlooked a row of pine trees that never changed much season to season, but somehow they still felt like they were growing, like me. I didn't unpack right away. My suitcase stayed half open for days, not because I couldn't be bothered, but because I didn't feel the need to reset my life so quickly. Something had shifted. And for once, I was letting it settle without rushing to reassemble the broken pieces. On Sunday, I walked to the cafe on 3rd and Willow. The barista smiled like he hadn't seen me in years, though it had only been 12 days. You look different, he said. I feel different, I replied. I sat at my usual table, window seat, no laptop this time. Just a copy of my second book. And Leo's signed program tucked inside like a bookmark for a future I no longer feared. I opened a blank page in my journal, wrote, "You don't always get a seat at the table, but sometimes you become the story they have to make room for." I didn't need anyone to say I belonged anymore. I just needed to remember I never stopped being worthy of presence. And Grandpa, he saw that before anyone else did. He didn't give me the last word to make noise. He gave it to me, to finally let myself hear it.